Good day, and welcome to our online discussion of assisted suicide, euthanasia, and people with disabilities for September 26th, 2014. My name is Amy Hasbrook, and I'm the director of Toujours Vivant-Not Dead Yet. We are a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending-of-life practices that have a discriminatory impact on people with disabilities. There are several basic reasons for our position. The first is that legalizing assisted suicide is unnecessary because people already have the option either to commit suicide or to refuse medical treatment and to have palliative care even to the point of sedation until their body dies of whatever is the underlying condition. Secondly, we believe it's discriminatory because in our society we have a policy for prevention of suicide, except it seems as it applies to people with disabilities. So a non-disabled person who expresses a desire to die will be thought of as expressing an irrational feeling, and that person will be given suicide prevention treatment. But a person with a disability who says they want to die will be thought of as making a rational choice, and that person will be assisted to suicide, and we feel that's discriminatory. Thirdly, the people who advocate for assisted suicide say that it's a choice, but we don't believe that there's a choice to die where the person doesn't have a choice of where and how he or she lives. And the lack of choice doesn't come from the disability, it comes from the public policies that restrict the options for people with disabilities. And finally, the safeguards that have been put in place where it is legal have not prevented people who are ineligible for those programs or who should not die from being killed. And therefore, we don't believe that the safeguards are effective where they're proposed. That's another reason we don't want legalization of assisted suicide. That's our position. But the goal of our online discussion is to enable people with disabilities to come together and talk about these issues ourselves. Because in general, in the media, all you hear is on the one side from sort of liberal, progressive people who say that they want assisted suicide. And on the other side, you mostly hear from religious types or conservatives who say, you know, that this is an issue of the sanctity of life and it's a religious issue. But we don't take it that way. This, for us, is not a religious issue. This is an issue of disability rights. And we want to create, Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet wants to create a place where people with disabilities can approach this from our point of view. So that's why we've created this online discussion every week, except for, of course, when we don't have internet service at the house or when we're off in Chicago. There are different ways to participate. You can either go to the Google Hangouts on Air and join us there. There's also a YouTube channel. If you search YouTube for euthanasia and assisted suicide, you'll find our discussions. Also, our website at tvndy.ca. If you go to the events tab, find today's date, you'll be able to join our discussion and ask questions. And if you want to be put on the mailing list for direct invitation, that's also an option. For more information about the subjects we discuss in our weekly meetings, you can write to me at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can visit our webpage at tvndy.ca. You can follow me on Twitter @TVNDY, or you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet, and that's TOUJOURSVIVANT NOTDEADYET. I know it's long, but Unfortunately, TVNDY wasn't available when I made the Facebook page. So our topics for today are the TVNDY in Chicago, strategy and planning meeting, the senseless death of Yvan Tremblay, and some news briefs and an announcement and a short commentary. Okay. The first is Not Dead Yet in Chicago. And from September 18th to 20th, Not Dead Yet participated in a protest sponsored by Not Dead Yet US and American Disabled for Attended Programs Today, also known as ADAPT, against the World Federation of Right to Die Societies. The Federation had its biennial conference in Chicago at the invitation of the Final Exit Network in the United States. More than 60 people with disabilities protested in front of the Embassy Suites Hotel where the conference was in progress. On the first day, there was chanting, street theater, and discussions with people who came out of the conference to talk to us. Unfortunately, they weren't there to listen, but we had some pretty intense conversations anyway. There was a delegation. We sent a delegation to the Chicago Tribune newspaper and the media building that was right across the street to ask why they had printed a press release from the Final Exit Network, essentially advertising their meeting, but had not mentioned that there were activists who opposed assisted suicide right out front. And we did not get satisfaction, I have to say. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, spoke to the American activists about the situation in Quebec and Canada. Not Dead Yet US and ADAPT offered their enthusiastic support for our efforts. And members of both groups were both offered a lot of support and sympathy, saying, you know, they understood that we were in a really difficult position here in Canada, and they did not envy our position, and they were glad that we were here working on it. Longtime activist Elaine Kolb led the group in singing several of her songs, affirming the right to independent living, disability pride, and opposing assisted suicide. And on the afternoon of the second day, the protesters managed to block all the hotel entrances, temporarily preventing conference attendees from leaving for a banquet that was being held off-site. That was a pretty exciting moment when we realized we had all the entrances blocked. The hotel staff were not very happy, and the attendees were very unhappy, but the idea is to stop business as usual, and that's what we did. On the morning of October 20th, the third day, activists in wheelchairs blocked the elevators of the hotel where the conference was held. They unfurled the Not Dead Yet banner over the balcony to the atrium, and their chants could be heard throughout the hotel as the police escorted them out of the building. You can find photos, articles, and videos about the action at the Not Dead Yet US website at notdeadyet.org. So, and Nick Steenhout from Vivre dans la Dignité, Living with Dignity, put together a very nice video on that. So feel free to go and visit. Okay, the next item is strategy and planning meeting. On October 3rd, that's coming up next week, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, will hold a disability rights opposition to medical killing strategy and planning meeting at the Sheraton Four Points Hotel in Gatineau, Quebec, which is right next to Ottawa. Presenters will describe the history of our movement, what tactics have worked and what didn't work so well, and where we are going from here, from the beginning of the movement in the US to how social media can make our message heard. A panel of experts will talk about the Canadian movement thus far, and then interactive workshops will allow participants to brainstorm future strategies. So it's going to be a day-long workshop. It could be pretty exciting. We're having people in via Skype from Diane Coleman is going to be there via Skype from the US, Kevin Fitzpatrick from the United Kingdom, so it'll be a pretty good group. The event is free for people with disabilities. Donations are gratefully accepted from others. To register or request French or sign language interpreters, either for ASL or LSQ, or for more information, email info@tv-ndy.ca. Okay, our next item is the senseless death of Yvan Tremblay. We learned this week of the suicide of Yvan Tremblay, a quadriplegic man who was forced to move out of his apartment because of bureaucratic incompetence, basically. Mr. Tremblay lived in an adaptive apartment for 10 years. The managers of his building recently ordered him to move because of new security regulations imposed by the government. Management claimed that it would be impossible to evacuate Monsieur Tremblay in case of emergency. If he did not leave, move out, management said that they would move him into a smaller apartment that didn't have a kitchen or any storage space. So his options were, in effect, not options at all. Basically, moving from an apartment with a kitchen to moving to an apartment that doesn't have a kitchen, how are you expected to eat? I don't know how they could consider that apartment as being an apartment one could occupy, but be that as it may, that's what they said. As long as we don't provide access to the services necessary for independent living, many people with disabilities are also at risk of choosing death, especially where euthanasia or medical aid in dying is legal. And this the situation that Monsieur Tremblay ran into is exactly the problem that we talk about when we say that there is no choice to die if you don't have a choice of where and how you live. That's exactly the problem, and this is what happens. And we tell people this, and they say, oh no, don't worry about it, it's not going to happen. Well, here it is. It happens. He killed himself because he did not want to get kicked out of his apartment. This is what happens. And it'll happen more if assisted suicide is legal. Whatever they call it, whether it's euthanasia, whether it's medical aid in dying, it'll happen. Too many cases in Belgium and the Netherlands, Oregon, and elsewhere attest to this problem. People with disabilities with similar problems have asked for euthanasia for lack of other choices. As stated by the group Moelle Épinière et Motricité Québec, the government must understand that that vulnerable people have urgent needs, and beyond the statistics and numbers, there are human lives at stake. And we have to improve not only access to resources for independent living, but also palliative care. In addition, we have to avoid creating and applying regulations without considering the real and often dramatic impact on real people's lives. And just as a note, I want to thank Living with Dignity, Nick Steenhout at Living with Dignity, for help on putting together that report, because he plowed through a lot of information to pull that together, and I borrowed a lot of it. Okay, news briefs. We had a local event for Suicide Prevention Day in our town, and since I was on everybody's back about going to your local suicide prevention event, I figure I should probably put my money where my mouth was, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the local event. But first, I want to make sure, see if there's any questions that have come over from the other discussion. Has anybody asked a question? Schedule, no. Okay, excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay, nobody has asked a question now. Okay. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, and 40 other people attended the Suicide Prevention March in Salaberry de Valleyfield, Quebec on September 10th, a few weeks ago. We distributed flyers to participants and spoke to several people individually. No one that we talked to had thought about the contradiction between assisted suicide and suicide prevention. When we described this problem, most people maintained that assisted suicide was a good idea for people who were, quote unquote, suffering without even understanding the nature of their suffering. So essentially, these are people who support suicide prevention, but they had not even thought about the effect of assisted suicide on suicide prevention. So there you go. It was pretty discouraging, but this is exactly the people that we need to talk to and need to work on. So there you go. We have one announcement, which is that the Carter case will be heard at the Supreme Court on October 15th. The Council of Canadians with Disabilities, of which Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a project, will be represented by attorney David Baker. We are interveners in the case, along with many other organizations, but we are essentially the disability group intervening in this case. And finally, we don't expect any decision until next year. That's very typical. Okay, sorry. And let's see, what else? Okay. All right, the last item today is a commentary, and I call it The Joy of Solidarity. And it's about our visit to Chicago last week. The work that we do here, especially for me as a person who's lived all my life with disabilities, it's very hard because every day I read about people with disabilities like mine and others, who are killed because of their disabilities, or who are told that, you know, their lives aren't worth living because they have a disability, and they believe it and they request assisted suicide and they get it, even though they wouldn't qualify for the assisted suicide as the law is written in whatever place they do. So it's very hard work, and it attacks your self-esteem. And I know I've said this before, but it can be difficult at times. And it's also lonely work because there aren't a lot of other people with disabilities doing this work. There are a few, but when you're talking to non-disabled people who come at this from a religious perspective, they sometimes don't really understand what we deal with. And we can explain it but they don't always understand at the gut level. So it can be very lonely work. So being with a group of disabled people who feel pride in themselves and as people with disabilities, that feels really good, because it's a feeling that's hard to hold on to when you're alone, away from other people with disabilities. And that's why isolation can be very destructive. Also, being with people who understand that assisted suicide and euthanasia are a very real threat, and people who are willing to put their bodies on the line to fight against assisted suicide and euthanasia, also feels really good. Being with those people, because it makes me feel like I'm not crazy for believing this. And it gives me a lot of strength to be with folks like that. So also being with these folks and chanting pride and defiance with people who feel the same way I do feels really, really good. And I wish there were more this doesn't happen around here much. In Canada, people don't often protest, and there's there's a difference in culture, and sometimes protesting is important, not only for the people who are listening to the protest, but also for people who are doing the protesting. And so there aren't many opportunities to do it here, but when I get to do it, it's helpful in a lot of ways. The Chicago action was really good medicine for those of us who were there. It makes you feel a little more sane, a little more solid, and it will have to last us a long time because there aren't always a lot of occasions for people to come together. But I hope that this meeting next week, the strategy and planning meeting, will be another example where people with disabilities can come together and talk about these difficult things and get support from each other, because that's one of the reasons that groups like us exist. People with disabilities need to support each other, and that's why it's important to have weekly discussions, make a place for people to come and get that support and to hear information and to learn more about the issue. So there you go. How to get in touch with us. There are lots of different ways. First, we have a Twitter feed, which is @TVNDY. You can also contact us via our website at, tvndy.ca. You can email me at info@tv-ndy.ca. It's a little different. And let's see, website, Facebook. Facebook, we have a Facebook page, which is on Facebook/Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. So there are lots of different ways to be in touch. We probably will not be here next week because we will be in the middle of our strategy and planning meeting, but we will be back in 2 weeks, and I hope that you will join us again, or people will join us again in 2 weeks. And I look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Until next time, goodbye.